My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was living the perfect suburban life in a quiet neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio, until the day I discovered my husband's secret second family lived only 20 minutes away, and our children had been best friends for almost 3 years. If this story hits you the way it hit me, please watch the full video, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another real family story like this one. I still remember the exact moment everything started to unravel. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and the faint sweetness of falling leaves. My 7-year-old son, Ethan, came running through the front door with his backpack half open and a huge grin on his face. "Mom, can Mason come over after school tomorrow, please? We're building the biggest Lego city ever." Mason. The name had been floating around our house for months. Ethan talked about him constantly, how Mason was the fastest runner on the playground, how they both loved the same video games, how Mason's mom made the best chocolate chip cookies. I had never met Mason or his mother. In our busy lives, playdates usually happened at school or at the park. I always meant to arrange something proper, but work, soccer practice, and the endless pile of laundry kept getting in the way. That evening, while Ethan was in the bath, I texted the number he had for Mason's mom. "Hi, this is Sarah, Ethan's mom. Ethan is begging for a playdate with Mason tomorrow. Would that work for you?" The reply came almost immediately. "Of course. Mason has been asking the same thing. We live over on Willow Creek Drive. You're welcome to drop him off around 4 if that's easier." Willow Creek Drive. I knew the street. It was on the other side of the small creek that cut through our suburb, maybe a 15-minute drive if traffic was light, 20 minutes at most. I felt a small wave of relief. Finally, I would meet this mysterious Mason and his mother. The next day, I pulled into a neat 2-story house with white siding and a red front door. A woman about my age opened it. She had warm brown eyes, a soft smile, and the kind of tired but happy look that only mothers of young children understand. "You must be Sarah," she said, stepping aside. "I'm Rachel. Come in. The boys are already in the living room destroying my carpet with Legos." We laughed. The house smelled like cinnamon and clean laundry. On the mantel were framed photos of Rachel, a little boy who was clearly Mason, and a man whose face made my stomach drop so hard I thought I might be sick right there on her hardwood floor. The man in the photos was my husband, David. Same smile. Same slight scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. Same blue eyes that looked at me every morning across the breakfast table. I stared at the largest photo. David had his arm around Rachel. Mason sat on his shoulders. They looked happy, complete. Rachel noticed my silence. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "You look pale." I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Just long week. Work has been crazy." She nodded sympathetically and offered me coffee. I accepted because I needed something to do with my hands. While she poured, I kept stealing glances at the photos. There were more in the hallway. David teaching Mason to ride a bike. David and Rachel at what looked like a beach vacation. A recent Christmas photo where David wore the same ugly sweater I had bought him 2 years earlier. My mind raced. How was this possible? David left for work every morning at 7:15. He came home at 6:30 most nights. Sometimes he had late meetings. Sometimes he traveled for work. I had never questioned it. We had been married 9 years. Ethan was our only child. We had talked about having another, but the timing never felt right. Rachel handed me a mug. "Mason talks about Ethan constantly. It's so sweet how close they've become." I nodded, unable to form words. The boys ran into the kitchen, both covered in Lego dust and laughing. Ethan hugged Mason like they had known each other their whole lives. Looking at them side by side, I noticed something that made my blood turn cold. They had the same slight wave in their hair, the same shape to their eyes, the same little gap between their front teeth. Rachel was watching them with pure motherly pride. They could almost be brothers, couldn't they? I set the coffee down before I dropped it. Somehow I made it through the next hour. I smiled. I asked normal questions. I learned that Rachel worked part-time as a nurse, that she and her husband had been together for 6 years, that Mason had just turned 7 in March 3 months after Ethan. When I finally said we had to leave, Rachel walked us to the door. "We should do this more often," she said. "Maybe a joint playdate next weekend? The boys would love it." I agreed, my voice sounding distant even to myself. Then I drove home in complete silence while Ethan chattered in the back seat about how awesome Mason's house was and how cool his dad seemed. His dad. I pulled into our driveway and sat there for a long time after Ethan ran inside. David's car was already in the garage. He was home early. I walked into the kitchen. He was at the counter making a sandwich, still in his work clothes. "Hey, babe," he said without looking up. "How was the playdate?" I stared at the back of his head, the same head I had rested against 1,000 times, the same man who kissed me goodnight every evening. "It was fine," I said carefully. "Mason's mom seems nice." He turned then, smiling. "That's good. Ethan talks about that kid nonstop." I watched his face for any flicker of guilt, any sign that he knew what I had just seen. There was nothing, just the same easy expression he always wore. That night I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing, and replayed every late night, every business trip, every time he had been stuck at the office. The pieces started fitting together in a way that made me feel like I was losing my mind. The next morning I waited until he left for work. Then I opened his laptop. He had never been careful with passwords. Our anniversary date unlocked it instantly. I found the second email account within minutes. The one he used only on this computer. There were messages to Rachel. Sweet messages. Practical messages about Mason's dentist appointments and school events. Photos of the three of them on weekends I thought David had been traveling. There was a shared calendar. Half of his work trips lined up perfectly with time spent at the house on Willow Creek Drive. I sat on the floor of our home office and cried until my eyes burned. Then I stopped crying and started thinking. I did not confront him that day, or the next. I needed more. I needed to understand how deep this went, how long he had been living two lives, whether there were more secrets waiting to destroy what little I had left. Over the following weeks, I became someone I barely recognized. I tracked his phone when he left it unattended. I noted the times he claimed to be in meetings. I even drove past the house on Willow Creek once, just to see his car parked in the driveway in the middle of a weekday afternoon, while he was supposed to be in Cleveland for a conference. Every new discovery felt like another cut. The worst part was watching Ethan and Mason together. Their friendship was real. Pure. They had no idea their fathers were the same man. They had no idea they were half-brothers. One Saturday, the boys begged for a sleepover at Mason's house. Rachel texted me enthusiastically. David, of course, thought it was a wonderful idea. I almost said no. Then I realized this was the chance I needed. That evening, I dropped Ethan off. Rachel invited me in for a glass of wine. David was working late. I already knew he would arrive after I left. I stayed longer than I planned. Rachel was easy to talk to, too easy. She told me how her husband traveled a lot for work, but always made time for Mason. How they had met 6 years ago when she was a single mother struggling after a bad breakup. How he had stepped in and become the father Mason never had. She spoke about him with genuine love, the same love I had once felt. When I finally left, Ethan and Mason were already in pajamas, building another Lego fortress on the living room floor. David's car turned onto the street just as I reached the corner. I watched in the rearview mirror as he parked, walked up the path, and kissed Rachel on the porch like a man coming home. I drove around the block 3 times before I could see straight enough to head back to our empty house. That night, I sat at our kitchen table with a notebook and began writing everything down. Dates, times, photos I had quietly taken of the evidence on his laptop, screenshots of the second email account, the shared calendar, the way the boys' birthdays lined up, the fact that David had been present for both of their first steps, just never at the same time. I did not know yet what I was going to do with it, I only knew I could not keep living in the dark. The following Monday, I made an appointment with a lawyer. A quiet, sharp woman named Patricia who specialized in family law and complicated divorces. I brought the notebook. I brought printed emails. I brought the sick feeling in my stomach that had become constant. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is more common than people think," she said gently. "Two families, two lives, one man who thinks he can keep them separate forever. The question is what you want to do now." I didn't have an answer yet. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was already gone. The only choice left was how much of the truth I was willing to set free and who would get hurt when it finally came out. Ethan still asked every day when he could see Mason again. David still kissed me goodnight like nothing was wrong. Rachel still sent friendly texts about future playdates. And somewhere in the middle of it all, two little boys who loved each other like brothers continued building their Lego cities, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was about to crack wide open. I went home that afternoon and stood in the doorway of Ethan's room, watching him sleep. His face looked so peaceful, so much like David's, so much like Mason's. I whispered into the quiet house, "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry for what's coming." Then I closed the door, sat on the living room floor, and began planning the next move. I spent the next 2 weeks moving like a ghost through my own life. Every morning I made Ethan breakfast and packed his lunch with the same careful attention I always had. Every evening I sat across from David at the dinner table and listened to him talk about his day as if half of it weren't a complete lie. The only difference was the cold weight sitting in my chest that never left. I recorded everything. Dates, times, screenshots, photos of the house on Willow Creek taken from across the street. I even found the second phone he kept in the glove compartment of his car, a cheap prepaid thing that only had Rachel's number and a few contacts related to Mason's school. I photographed the call log and put it back exactly as I found it. Patricia, the lawyer, told me I had more than enough to file. She also warned me that once the truth came out, there would be no putting it back. Ethan would be hurt. Mason would be hurt. Rachel would be shattered in ways I was only beginning to understand. I still wasn't ready to pull the trigger. Then the school called. It was a regular Tuesday. Ethan's teacher wanted both sets of parents to come in for a quick conference about a group project the boys were doing together. Apparently, Ethan and Mason had listed each other as family on a class family tree assignment. The teacher thought it was sweet and wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I forwarded it to David's work address with a simple note. "Can you make this?" He replied within minutes. "Of course, I'll be there." Rachel received the same email. She texted me right away, excited. "This is so cute. The boys really do act like brothers. See you Thursday?" I typed back, looking forward to it. Thursday arrived gray and cold. I dropped Ethan at school and drove straight to the lawyer's office to sign the papers I had been putting off. When I walked out, the folder felt heavier than it should have. Inside were the divorce petition, the evidence package, and a temporary custody request. Patricia would file everything the moment I gave the word. I sat in my car in the school parking lot 20 minutes early, watching parents arrive. David's car pulled in, then Rachel's. She waved when she saw me and walked over with a bright smile. "I'm so glad we're finally meeting the teacher together," she said. "Mason has been talking about this project nonstop." David appeared behind her. He kissed my cheek the way he always did in public, then turned to Rachel with a polite nod, the kind of nod you give a near stranger. I watched his face carefully. There was no flicker of recognition beyond the polite one. He was that good. We walked into the classroom together. The teacher, Mrs. Delgado, greeted us warmly and gestured to a table where the boys' family tree poster was laid out. In the center were two little drawings, Ethan and Mason holding hands. Above them, the boys had written brothers in crooked letters. Underneath, they had listed parents. Both of them had written David's name. Mason had written Rachel. Ethan had written me, But in the space for Dad, both boys had drawn the same man. Mrs. Delgado smiled. I thought it was adorable. They insisted they were brothers. I just wanted to make sure the families were comfortable with how they presented it. Rachel laughed softly. Kids and their imaginations, they're so close, it's no wonder. David chuckled too, but the sound was tight. I looked at the poster. Then I looked at David. Then I looked at Rachel. The room felt too small. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the hallway, a child laughed. I heard myself speak before I fully decided to. They're not imagining it. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Rachel's smile faltered. What do you mean? I opened the folder I had brought with me, the thinner version I had prepared for this moment. I slid the first photo across the table. David and Rachel on a beach. Then the Christmas picture. Then the screenshot of the shared calendar. Then the second phone log. David's face went completely still. The color drained from it so fast I thought he might pass out. Rachel stared at the photos. Her hand rose to her mouth. She looked at David, then at me, then back at the pictures like she was waiting for them to change into something else. This can't be, she whispered. David finally found his voice. Sarah, not here. Not like this. When then? I asked. My voice was steady in a way that surprised me. After another year of lies, after the boys start asking why they look so much alike, Mrs. Delgado stood up quickly. I think I should give you all some privacy. She left the room, closing the door softly behind her. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Rachel's eyes filled. How long? She asked David. Her voice cracked on the second word. He didn't answer, I did. At least 6 years, maybe longer. Mason is 7, Ethan is 7, do the math. Rachel's knees seemed to give out. She sank into a chair. You told me you were divorced. You told me your ex lived in another state. You told me you only had 1 child. David rubbed both hands over his face. I never meant for it to go this far. Which part? I asked. The second family or getting caught? He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw something like fear. I love both of you. I love both of them. I didn't know how to choose. Rachel let out a broken sound that was half laugh, half sob. You didn't choose. You just took. You took 2 homes, 2 sets of children, 2 women who trusted you. I felt tears on my own face, but I didn't wipe them away. The boys are best friends, David. They think they're brothers because they are. And you've been watching them grow up side by side like it was some kind of game. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. Rachel stood up suddenly. I need to get Mason. I can't be here. She walked out without looking at either of us. David turned to me. Sarah, please, we can fix this. We can figure it out. I picked up the folder. I already did. The papers are being filed this afternoon. You'll be served by the end of the week. I suggest you get a lawyer. I left him standing in the empty classroom next to the poster that still said brothers in 2 little boys' handwriting. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and quiet tears in the school parking lot while I waited for Ethan. When he climbed into the car, he was still buzzing about the project. Did you see our poster, Mom? Me and Mason are brothers on it. Mrs. Delgado said it was creative. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. His face was open and happy and completely unaware that his world had just shifted. I saw it, baby, I said. It was beautiful. That night David did not come home. He texted once. I'm staying at a hotel. We need to talk when you're ready. I didn't reply. Rachel texted me around midnight. I don't know what to say to you. I feel like the stupidest person alive. But the boys, they still love each other. Please don't take that away from them because of what he did. I stared at the message for a long time before answering. I would never take that from them. They're the only innocent ones in this. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. David tried to come back twice. Both times I met him at the door and told him to leave the papers with the process server instead. Ethan asked every day where Daddy was. I told him the truth in the simplest way I could. Mommy and Daddy were having some grown-up problems and needed time apart. Mason's name still came up constantly. The boys still wanted playdates. Rachel and I eventually agreed to meet at the park public, neutral, with both of us present. The first time was awkward and full of long silences, but the boys ran straight into each other's arms like nothing in the adult world could touch them. Over time, the meetings became less painful. Rachel and I never became friends exactly, but we became something else, two women who had been lied to by the same man and who now shared the responsibility of protecting two little boys who happened to be brothers. David eventually signed the divorce papers. He asked for joint custody of Ethan and regular visitation with Mason. The court agreed, with conditions. He would have to be honest with both boys in age-appropriate ways about who he was to them. He would have to stop pretending the two families existed in separate universes. The conversation with Ethan happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon in our living room. David sat on the couch, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. I stayed in the room but let him speak. "Buddy," he said, voice rough, "you know how you and Mason always say you're like brothers?" Ethan nodded, eyes bright. "That's because you are. You have the same dad. Me. I made some big mistakes and hurt a lot of people, including you and Mom and Mason and his mom. But I love you both more than anything. And nothing about that is going to change." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question that still breaks my heart when I remember it. "Does that mean Mason can come live with us sometimes? Like real brothers?" David's eyes filled. "We'll figure it out, okay? One day at a time." It wasn't perfect. It still isn't. There are hard days and court dates and moments when the anger comes back so strong I have to leave the room. The boys still build Lego cities together. They still argue over who gets the last cookie. They still fall asleep in the same blanket fort when they have sleepovers. And every once in a while, when I watch them laughing in the backyard, I catch Rachel's eye across the lawn, and we share a look that only the two of us understand. We were both married to a man who thought he could love two families without either of them noticing. He was wrong. But the boys he gave us, those two little best friends who turned out to be brothers, somehow survived the wreckage. And that, in the end, is the only part of the story that still feels like hope.